Thank you very much, Comrade Zanele. It's Ruth Mtlokotsi, the second Deputy President of NUMSA. Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning to everyone. Let me take this opportunity to welcome everyone to our second panel that will be dealing with the Uniting the World Against Big Pharma and Vaccine Injustice. In our panel, we will be joined with 11 panelists. The first panelist is Comrade Rosheda Muller. She's the president of South African Informal Traders Alliance. The second panelist is Comrade Jeremy Corbyn, the British MP, the founder of Peace and Justice Project. The third panelist is Comrade Esther Kandeh, the Director on Women and Extractives. The fourth speaker is Comrade Belay, the General Co-ordinator of Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa. The fifth speaker is Comrade Awande Buthelezi, the researcher and the co-organizer of Cooperatives and Policy Alternative Center. The sixth speaker is Comrade Hameda, Deedat, the interim organizer of People and Vaccine Campaign of the Republic of South Africa. The seventh speaker is Comrade Pedersen, the Senior Humanitarianism Policy Advisor and Medicines from the Frontiers. The eighth speaker is Comrade Ferrial Adam, the organizer of Climate Justice Charter Movement of the Republic of South Africa. We also joined by Comrade Leidecker, who's the director of the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung of Republic of South Africa. The 11th speaker is Comrade Aslam Dasoo, the convener of the Progressive Health. Our last speaker, it will be Comrade Carlos Marentes, who is the director of the Border Agricultural Workers Project Coordinator, La Via Campesina from the North America region. Comrades, we all have 3 minutes to speak. I think I'm also going to do the same from what Comrade Zanele did. I will indicate if you are exceeding the time that is allocated to you. I'm going to hand over to our first panelist, Comrade Rosheda. The platform is yours.
Hi, thank you, Chair. I thank you for inviting me onto this platform and duly acknowledge the presence of such a distinguished representation. Greetings and salutations to you all. To put it bluntly, ladies and gentlemen, we are very concerned about the welfare of our sector insofar as an equitable distribution of COVID-19 vaccines is concerned. It would seem that equitable distribution is a term that applies and occurs only within and among the rich Western nations. Indeed, we welcome the vaccine rollout in our country, and we understand who needs to be prioritized. However, I do worry about the informal workers and their families, as
We can't hear Comrade Rosheda.
Sorry, I don't know. I had a glitch in my in my Zoom here. I'm so sorry about that. As I was saying, currently we do not know the status of vaccine distribution, given the uncertainty around the efficacy of the first 1 million doses of the AstraZeneca South Africa bought, albeit in good faith. This only slows down the roll-out process and further disadvantages low-income workers. For as long as this is delayed, our workers who go out and brave the elements each day are at greater risk of infection. We are, after all, frontline workers servicing the daily passing trade. The South African Informal Traders Alliance extends a plea to all represented on this platform to act in unison in a greater cause, that the preservation of life. We stand ready to work with you in ensuring a safe, proven, and timeous distribution of vaccine to the masses of marginalized informal workers all over the world. I am Rosheda Muller, the president of SITA. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Comrade Rosheda. We sincerely apologize about the technical glitches. Comrades, we'll move over to our third speaker. We are still allocating Comrade Jeremy Corbin. Comrade Esther Kandeh, the platform is yours, my leader. Comrade Esther. Unmute yourself, leader. You are still muted. Comrade Esther.
Okay, sorry about that. Good afternoon. Hello?
We can hear you, my leader.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, the topic is very important and is very timely, advocating for our frontline workers, for effective and healthy vaccination. This crucial movement is a very important call, and we want to join the African colleagues all over Africa to advocate for our frontline workers. Drawing back experience from Ebola that affected and saw the demise of a lot of frontline workers and health workers in Sierra Leone in 2014, 2015, the sub-region, Sierra Leone, Guinea, and Liberia. We saw a lot of frontline workers lost their life, their family lost their life, just so that because they are willing and were fighting for their rights and the lives of other people. Now we are in this pandemic, COVID-19. We are in the whole world stands still because of COVID-19. This is very serious. This is not a time to marginalize countries like developing countries like my country, Sierra Leone, a very small country and underdeveloped. This is the time for all Africans to actually take the bull by its own. When I say Africa, I also mean our leaders to actually join forces together so that we and the frontline workers can get the kind of attention they need. They are families, they are also part of the society. If they are not protected, it can easily go back to the community and also affect the community. But also there's something very important as a civil society activist, because we go to the community, we hear people talk, there's a lot of myths, there's a lot of misinformation about this vaccine that is out, which I think is one of the areas we should step up by debunking some of this information that is going around, that the vaccine is not good, it's actually prepared so that they can kill Africans. So these are things we need to actually come up as Africans so that we speak with one voice. And I think the CDA, the World Health Organization, and the pharmaceutical industry have a great role to play in that. If those information are going back, even the frontline workers will be afraid to even take the vaccination. So if we are going to succeed in this campaign, I think one of the things we need to do, how do we ensure that the vaccine that is coming that is effective and is something that our frontline workers can accept, because there are some that are still skeptical about it. So as a civil society activist, we think there's a lot more to do, in as much as we want our frontline workers to be safe, but there's a lot more to do in terms of information dissemination. If we say we are just going to campaign for the vaccination and forgetting that aspect of it.
Can you wrap up, my leader?
Come again?
I was saying that, can you wrap up?
Yeah, so that's my message. More information, more sensitization on the effectiveness and the safety of the vaccine is also needed.
Thank you very much, Comrade Esther. Our next speaker is Comrade Million Belay. Over to you, Comrade Million.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me, Vishwas. My hats off for extraordinary work that you're doing. I am the General Coordinator of the Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa, the biggest social movement in Africa. We work in all of the African countries now. It's broad-based. I just want to use this opportunity also to thank the thousands of African civil society organizations who did really fill the gap that was created in servicing our local communities during the lockdowns, and who really organized food and other services to our local communities. I think they filled that gap, and governments in their future strategies should recognize that. I just wanted to also broaden this issue, out of the vaccine issue, which is very much important, I know. But what is the source of COVID? Basically, there are two sources of pandemics, including COVID. One is expansion to new natural areas by industrial agricultural system, and also intensive livestock production. These are the two source of pandemics and future pandemics, and including COVID. If we really want to understand understand the sources and address future pandemics, including COVID, we need to address that. So we have to have two strategies. One is a short-term strategy, and the other is a long-term strategy. As AFSA, as a short-term strategy, we actually support the proposal from South Africa and India to the TRIPS Council for the waiver from the implementation, application, and enforcement of the intellectual property rights of products and their underlying technologies for prevention, containment, or treatment of COVID until widespread vaccination is in place globally, and until the majority of the world population has developed an immunity. So in terms of a strategy, we actually support that. But counter to the industrial agriculture as a long-term strategy, we promote food sovereignty. Food sovereignty is very, very much critical, because we could see now, in vaccine nationalism, in vaccine hoarding, that Africa has to rely on itself. We cannot rely on other continents for our food, for our vaccine, and for other issues. So food sovereignty is very much important, and at the center of food sovereignty, the tenets of food sovereignty is local ownership of our food system and self-sufficiency. I think that's very much important. And as part of the broader agroecology agenda, food sovereignty agenda, we need to endorse also agroecology. And in this way, we can produce more food, we can produce nutritious and healthy food without impacting the environment, and in a rights-based approach. I think that's very much critical. our small research have found that there are lots and lots of
Can you
seeds,
wrap up, comrade?
yes, seeds and vegetables with African farmers, which are much more nutritious and which are very, very critical to our to the protecting of African societies from COVID and future pandemics. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Comrade Million. Can we invite our next speaker, Comrade Awande Buthelezi? Comrade Awande.
Thank you, Chair. I have the pleasure of speaking from the perspective of the Cooperative and Policy Alternative Center, COPAC. And I'd like to begin first by saying that this week we saw xenophobic attacks take place in Durban against traders in the city. And in speaking about uniting the world against big pharma and vaccine injustice, we have to speak also from a South African perspective, especially with regards to the rights of migrants and refugees to be ensured. Their rights should be ensured during the rollout of the vaccine plan. We need to stand in solidarity with these communities and with all who live in our land. As we are fighting for international unity and solidarity, we must also extend the same spirit of solidarity locally and regionally to all our brothers and sisters. And our work at COPAC, it spans systemic alternatives, particularly through our work on food sovereignty and climate justice. And our work on food sovereignty with small-scale farmers, local community food producers is an example of how lines of solidarity can be built through the creation of an alternative food system. These are the kind of things in the kind of uniting and solidarity that this kind of event is putting forward that we need to think about, and examples of the ways in which we can come together, particularly in times of crisis. Our work on climate justice also stands in solidarity with and connects to other 1.5 degrees Celsius movements around the planet. And the theme that comes out of this work, more relevant than ever during this time, is the concept and the reality of commoning. Commoning is sustaining life right now for a lot of people throughout the global south, in our country also. And particularly in the context of climate crisis and the pandemic, this concept and this issue and reality of commoning is something which will become more important. Commoning is a practice of collaborating and sharing to meet everyday needs and to achieve well-being of individuals, communities, and lived environments. And it is in the spirit of commoning that I must say that we need to call and fight for a decommodified vaccine. We need to ensure against future pandemics through the strengthening of our public healthcare systems. Thank you, Chair, and I'd like to cede my time.
Thank you very much, Comrade Awande. I think you did well in terms of time. It was 2 minutes. Can we invite our next speaker, Comrade Hameda? The platform is yours, my leader.
Thank you very much, Comrade Ruth, and good afternoon to everybody. I'm representing the PVC, which is the People's Vaccine Campaign of South Africa, but I'm also the Executive Director of Naledi. So just in terms of who the PVC is and what we're demanding, we demand safe and affordable and effective vaccines for all in South Africa, as well as the Global South. We are a network representing labor, civil society organizations, CSOs, NGOs, health professionals across the various fraternities, as well as academics and individuals who are all concerned and fighting for the access to affordable vaccines, as well as safe vaccines. We serve as a vehicle to speak out against vaccine apartheid. And we also are currently trying to do a lot of advocacy and education work. We've developed a manual and we're hoping to engage communities at the grassroots level so that they can become the part of the campaign and become the societal watchdog to ensure that the interests of South Africans, particularly in the context of the vaccine, is served. I think we also strongly oppose to vaccine apartheid, and we demand, I think other comrades have raised it, we demand that there's a TRIPS waiver at the WTO, particularly in the context of a pandemic. We feel that the lack of equal or no access to vaccines in certain countries in the global south, in the context of a pandemic is a moral catastrophe. And we believe that licensing on a collective basis with technology transfer, which is south to south, on a south to south basis, is essential for us to be able to address this pandemic. Finally, in terms of the vaccine and vaccine production, we believe that South Africa has the potential to do this. And if they do not, in terms of international pharmaceutical companies and institutions like the WTO and the World Health Organization, if they do not facilitate vaccine production, which is essential for us in terms of our own ability to have sovereign infrastructure, it is an indictment. For us to be able to produce vaccines for ourselves is actually more than a national security issue. It is actually a matter of life and death. And so we therefore demand, both in terms of the ending of the apartheid against vaccines and withholding of vaccines for people in the global south. And we definitely want to ensure that in terms of the rollout that the apartheid, and I think comrades have raised that as well, that the way in which the rollout of the vaccines are happening in South Africa really speaks to the issues on the ground, and that we put the most vulnerable first. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Comrade Hameda. Our next panelist is Comrade Jens Pedersen. Comrade Jens, the platform is yours.
Thank you, Ruth, and thanks for the organizers for having me on this distinguished panel. I think it's important that we must acknowledge that at the moment we are relying on a global access system to vaccines, which is based solemnly on procurement. In other words, it's based on the buying power of the nations or the corporations that are accessing vaccines at the moment. Now, an access system based on a buying power and purely on procurement perpetuates inequality. What it does, as we see now, is that it prevents poorer nations, Africa in particular, to equitably access vaccines. We have to challenge that, and we have to challenge it from a political perspective. Now, as was said earlier by Mr. Belay as well, we know from a long time that in order to secure and have any semblance of equity when it comes to, for example, vaccines as it is now, we must be self-sufficient. COVID-19 has taught us that whether it's the vaccines, whether it's the treatment, whether it's the PPE, in order to have an equitable access, we need to expand and increase African manufacturing. And the COVID-19 pandemic is just the latest example of that. Esther mentioned the Ebola outbreak in West Africa, which is another example where we as Africa relied on technology and vaccines from wealthy nations. Now, when we are raising some of the concerns in order to secure equity and to expand manufacturing, we are often challenged and faced, as we are at the World Trade Organization at the moment, with technical arguments. Technical arguments such as that existing mechanisms within the TRIPS system are sufficient, that rolling out manufacturing is not going to have an impact on the current pandemic. There is criticism of national regulatory authorities. However, these technical arguments are used to hide behind a lack of political will, because what we must accept and acknowledge and how we must approach this is from the perspective that it remains a political struggle. Vaccine equity and access to vaccines for African countries and communities is and will remain a political struggle. Only if we build the right political coalitions, if we demonstrate the international political solidarity as we have now, and if we support and pressure our political leadership, will we be able to address and overcome all of these technical arguments that are otherwise presented as barriers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Comrade Jens. Our next speaker is Comrade Ferrial. Comrade Ferrial, the platform is yours. Unmute yourself.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to the organizers for such an amazing assembly. I'm coming from the perspective of the Climate Justice Charter and the link to health. So one of the things that, just for people who don't know, the Climate Justice Charter was drawn up in South Africa over the last, it's taken a number of years of work, but we've delivered it to the South African Parliament last year. And we deal with, we've consulted with a range of people, from workers to youth to media, and kind of honed in on the demands, and one of which was health. And it specifically deals with emergency, holistic healing, and preventative health care. And if we look at what's been happening right now with COVID, we can see the inequality in healthcare, and everyone's been saying this on this discussions from the start, is that there's a big inequality in our healthcare systems. And what this means is that this will also manifest, if you think about the impacts of climate change, the harms that it will bring and the injustice that it will bring. And we're seeing that, living it right now. So we need to be aware, and that's the thing of how we can use the lessons from COVID. Definitely we need a public, accessible, responsive healthcare system, which we don't have. And you can see the private sector more and more pushing, and we saw that in South Africa, where the private sector, where certain political parties were pushing for private healthcare to have access and to kind of roll out the vaccine. So we need to stop that. We need to stop the privatization that's happening around our health, around our water, around our food. We need a preventative orientation. So the other thing about the Climate Justice Charter, even though we drew it up in South Africa, is that it's not just for South Africa, and it calls for a radical Pan-Africanism, and that is something that is important because we can use it across the continent. We know that with COVID-19 and the vaccines, that Africa is in the moral crisis of vaccine injustice, and rich countries are hoarding it, which is absolutely sick. It's just appalling that they can do that. It's a violation of basic human rights. Rich countries have failed to solve the global pandemic. In fact, they've gone into a hole, and they've only kind of closed off their borders. And if we think about the kind of pandemics we're going to have with climate change and how much worse things are going to get, we can see that the world is not ready for the climate crisis. So there is a need for a renewed internationalism. We have to relook at it. We have to look at an internationalism that is grounded in practical resistance and struggle. We have to push back Big Pharma, and we have to push back privatization of our health and water and food. More pandemics, more variants are going to arise. It's going to happen. And without an effective healthcare system, we are only going to increase the divide between those that have and those that do not have. So I think that the Climate Justice Charter, it brings in all the different sectors, and it makes those linkages, which is very important, and I think should be spread across the continent. But I do think we need to use this, what has happened with COVID, as a reality of what can happen and how much worse it can be. So we need to stop Big Pharma from behaving the way that it's doing, but also we need to stop rich countries for doing what they're doing. I mean, one of the speakers mentioned Israel. That is just atrocious. There is no words to describe how disgusting that is. And we have to, as civil society, we have to start standing up.
Can you wrap up, comrade?
Behavior. I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Comrade Ferrial. Our next speaker is Comrade Jan. Comrade Jan?
Yes, I'm here. Hello, Ruth.
Hi.
Nice to meet all of you. Just a quick correction. I'm still named as the director of the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation Southern African office. That is technically not correct, and it has something to do with this panel. I'm now the new head of our Geneva office, which is a new office that we created just to deal with some aspects from a democratic socialist perspective of what we have discussed now, because it's supposed to be dealing with three intersecting topics, which is international labor, global social rights, and global health. And I mean, a lot of things have been said already here that I don't want to repeat in terms of vaccination access. It's just very obvious that denying universal access to vaccination is a self-defeating policy, because it will increase the risk of mutation and variations, deeming the whole process of vaccination irrelevant unless you want to have a massive global and even more intense mobility restriction regime and border regimes, which is simply not pertainable. So it's self-defeating, and it's obvious that universal access has to be generated. Second, but this is more than a legal right, or like opening up, for example, the right to. Apparently the vaccines that are available are very sometimes difficult to produce. It's not just, as Jens Pedersen said, a question of procurement. Main problem is also distribution. I will come to this in my last point. There are multiple actors that are also problematic, and I know many of you have already here said something about the situation in Israel. I would like us, actually, since we are here all in Africa, to be as loud about, I think, the scandalous behavior of many African governments. Most importantly, I think, the government of Tanzania and its ridiculous president, who are COVID deniers and who are condemning their population to death. And it's completely unacceptable, and the complete silence of the African Union and African leadership on these regimes is absolutely abhorrent, and I think it's a very big problem. So lastly, let me just say, I think for us as an organization, the necessity of transnational organizing on this question is obvious, because we need a global system of solidarity and global direct financing and global direct financing of public health in Africa and other countries. But because if this pandemic has shown one thing, it's that there is an access, there needs to be that one thing is possible. If we use a global vaccination program, and to come to an end, as an entry point to finance infrastructure like we did, for example, with the HIV/AIDS campaigns all across the African continent. Beyond the question of vaccination, these infrastructure could actually serve to distribute all other, I think, publicly available vaccinations, other healthcare providers, because it makes, for me, the question of universal access to all available therapies is a starting point for a global public healthcare system that should be equally and globally financed, and healthcare should not be just left to the market forces. And with this, I want to leave it. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, Comrade JJ. Comrades, thank you very much for the comments. I can see also comments are coming in from the chat box. Keep on throwing your comments towards the end of the program. Comrade Vish will deal with the comments. Our next speaker is Comrade Dasoo. Over to you, Comrade Dasoo. Comrade Esther, can you mute yourself, leader? Comrade Dasoo?
Hi, hello everyone. Good afternoon to you all. Thank you for the organizers and others.
Hold on a second. Comrade Esther, can you mute yourself, leader? We can hear you from the background. Can you mute yourself? Thank you, my leader. Proceed, Comrade Dasoo.
Yes. So my name is Aslam Dasoo. I'm the convener of the Progressive Health Forum, which is a national advocacy network of health veterans, health activists, experts, and researchers concerned with the state of the public health system, and now with the pandemic. I think most of what I wanted to say has been touched on in some or other form by the other speakers. So let me just focus on two things. First is that the global public health emergency due to COVID-19 is a singular harbinger of the future of the world. Now, having already delivered the greatest shock to the global economy in recorded history, the response of governments has rightly focused on keeping their populations safe, while wrongly forecasting a return to normal economic activity in due course. And this is because of a failure to place the pandemic in a broader context of this Anthropocene period in which humanity has left its mark on the planet. The crisis of global heating, biodiversity collapse is coinciding with the crisis in global capital, together with the loss of capabilities in states to provide public goods. and the advent of COVID-level pandemics now into the future. So obstacles to a recovery brings up a great irony in that big pharma, which is rightly criticized for trade policy that reduces access to vaccines, and many speakers have spoken before me about this, especially for those in the developing world, is matched in this mendacity by governments worldwide. So expecting a TRIPS waiver to stimulate supply in the short or medium term is the triumph of hope over experience. But this still remains a necessary and vital struggle, not so much to obtain a waiver in terms of a protocol that requires the consent of those with no incentive to grant it, but more to entrench an entirely new regime to meet an increasingly precarious future of the worsening burden of disease. TRIPS can't be reformed. It must be removed and a new protocol put in place. But this is a struggle of decades, and we've been involved in the struggle as we developed South Africa's pharmaceutical regime for the post-apartheid democratic era, and which was mediated by Kofi Annan at the UN together with President Mbeki, which was the stimulus for the global agreement that we see now in TRIPS. Now, during the AIDS crisis here, Pharma agreed to provide ARVs at affordable prices in terms of this agreement. But in a supreme irony, Mbeki then refused to purchase them because he didn't believe HIV caused AIDS. So the villains of the peace in poor access to vaccine in the global south are both pharma and governments. Now, for now, we need much more vaccine through widespread voluntary licensing of manufacture to protect the people, which is the overarching human rights concern at this point in the pandemic. And while the restrictive trade policies of big pharma are well known, people tend to ignore, be more accommodating of, or even become apologists for governments whose policies, even in the developing world, aid and abet these restrictions. Two failures come to mind. The first, and we've seen it here, is confining procurement of vaccine to national governments on the simplistic premise that it's a rational response to the global demand for vaccine. Now, quite apart from the ineptitude of the government to procure vaccine, which we've seen, big pharma saw them coming and tailored supply accordingly and created this dog-eat-dog procurement crisis. This was inevitable, and we warned them about this, but they didn't listen. What is also inevitable is that in due course, private procurement by elite purchasers will occur. It will have been better then to get ahead of this curve by permitting transparent
Can you wrap up, comrade?
and non-profit private, I'm about to finish, and for-profit private procurement at risk under an overarching nationally mandated rollout strategy coordinated by governments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Comrade Dasoo. Our next speaker is Comrade Carlos. Comrade Carlos, the platform is yours.
Thank you, Comrade Ruth. Buenos días and good afternoon to all of you. This day, I'm communicating from El Paso, Texas, on the United States-Mexico border. I'm in the American side, and from here, from my window, I can see the landscape of Mexico. In the region, like in many places across the world, the pandemic has affected everybody, everywhere. There's much suffering, deaths, but the communities more affected, the migrant farm workers, the migrant communities, the indigenous communities, the women, especially the single mothers, have been affected the most. And these are the most affected who has been excluded from most of the measures of protection to confront COVID-19. Today, we are not only facing disproportionate impact upon the most marginalized and poor communities and poor people of the world, but today we are also facing a COVID-19 vaccination apartheid. And this is the purpose of this assembly, to figure out how to end that apartheid. one of the most important aspects that we have to remember that we are in this so terrible pandemic crisis due to the many years of colonization and of neoliberal policies that basically destroy most of the public health systems in the cities. And not only that, colonization and neoliberal policies that destroyed the ability and the capacity of many communities, many villages to deal with the health crisis like the one that we face today. So what should we do? You know, right now what we have is a situation where, for example, Zimbabwe don't have a one simple secure vaccine for a person, while, for example, countries like Canada, they have so many vaccines that they can apply a vaccine 6 times to every person in Canada. So what should we do to end this disproportional exclusion that is affecting most of our communities, most of the communities of people of color? We need to do many things. One, we need to dismantle and end the white privilege. We cannot continue to accept that only white people receive the vaccine while people of color are left out of this so-called vaccine rollout. The other thing that we need to do is we need to resist the continuation of certain sectors of the economy that are very important for capital. We as working people have the capacity to disrupt a fully return of sectors of the economy that are essential for capital. We have to take our lives out of the hands of the World Trade Organization. The World Trade Organization represents the interests of capital, including the corporations that now have the control over the different types of vaccines, you know, being applied to a minority of our population. We have to pressure the states and the institutions to strengthen the role of the World Health Organization in to make sure the equal access to vaccinations. Today, I think this assembly called upon all of us to call and to demand that the vaccine be a public right, a free right, and an essential right for everybody all over the world, including and especially the people most affected by this terrible pandemic crisis. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Comrade Carlos. Comrades, before I can pass the baton back to Comrade Vish, we are still locating Comrade Jeremy Corbyn. As soon as he has joined, I think Comrade Vish will give him the opportunity to speak. But thank you very much to all our panelists with your contribution. Thank you so much. Over to you, Comrade Vish.